Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Here is a thought to fall asleep with tonight. What if nothing outside your mind exists? Not the stars, not your hands, not even the voice you're hearing now. This idea, called solipsism, has haunted philosophers for centuries, not because it's complicated, but because it's disturbingly simple. If all experience happens inside the mind, how do we prove there's anything outside of it? And if we can't, what does that mean about love, memory, death, truth? This is just one of the 100 strange, obscure, and quietly disturbing ideas we're going to explore tonight. Some will sound like riddles, some will feel like jokes, some will feel like staring into a cracked mirror, but all of them in their own way will leave you changed, softly, silently, somewhere behind the eyes. If this kind of thing keeps your brain humming while the rest of the world sleeps, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We post every single day, which means there's always something new to fall asleep to. Also, let us know in the comments, what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching from? We always read them. Now let's begin. The first strange idea is called the ship of Theseus. Imagine a wooden ship in a museum. It's ancient, revered, sacred, but over time one plank rots and is replaced. Then another, until one day none of the original wood remains. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine that all the old planks were saved, stored and reassembled elsewhere. Which ship is the real one? This problem, first posed by the Greeks, isn't just about boats, it's about identity. The human body replaces most of its cells over time. Memories fade, beliefs change. Are you still the same person you were 10 years ago? Or has the self been slowly replaced piece by piece like the ship? Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, because both he and the river have changed. Identity, in this light, isn't fixed, it's fluid, shifting, haunted by continuity, but never containing it. And yet we cling to the idea of a stable self. We write resumes, biographies, therapy notes, but the self is a story, a useful fiction." Next is a thought experiment from the medieval theologian Anselm, the ontological argument. It says that if one can imagine a perfect being, it must exist, because existing is more perfect than not existing. It's a logic puzzle disguised as proof of God. Even if it feels hollow, it reveals something eerie about the way language can be twisted into theology. Kant rejected it, Schopenhauer mocked it, but the idea lingers. That a sentence can summon divinity. What else do we speak into existence without knowing? Then there's Zeno's paradox. The arrow is flying through the air, but at any single point in time, it occupies a single position. And if it's at rest in every single moment, how does it move at all? This paradox breaks motion into infinite slices, and in doing so, reveals that even movement is a mystery. Zeno wanted to defend the idea that everything is illusion. That change is impossible. It's not that he was right, it's that he was unsettlingly good at sounding like he might be. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we find Gilbert Ryle's category mistake. He described a man watching a university tour. He sees the library, the classrooms, the dorms. Then he asks, "But where is the university?" He misunderstood. The university isn't a building. It's the organization of all the buildings. He made a category mistake. And we do this too, all the time. We look for the soul like it's an organ. We treat consciousness like a location. But maybe some things are not things. Maybe some realities only exist in arrangement. This is how the mind works. Not just what is seen, but how it's seen. Which brings us to the brain in a vat, a modern retelling of Descartes' evil demon thought experiment. Imagine your brain is sitting in a vat, hooked up to a supercomputer, feeding it false experiences. You believe you're living a full life, but it's all simulation. Is there any way to know? Could you be dreaming right now? How do you prove you're not? Descartes tried to anchor himself in certainty by saying, "I think, therefore I am." But even that has cracks. What is the I that thinks? What is thought without context? David Hume went further. He said when he looks inward, he finds no self, only a bundle of perceptions shifting and unconnected. No stable core, just experience passing through. This is echoed in Buddhist philosophy. The self is not a thing, but a process, an illusion sustained by attachment. And yet, illusions can be powerful. Then there's the concept of moral luck, coined by Bernard, Williams, and Thomas Nagel. It asks, can someone be blamed for actions shaped by chance? Two drunk drivers leave the bar. One hits a child. One drives home safely. Same behaviour, different outcome. Are they equally guilty? Morally, legally, emotionally? Most people say no. But the logic says yes. The randomness of outcome shouldn't change the nature of the act. And yet it does. This isn't just academic. It's personal. People are punished or praised based on luck all the time. Life is full of invisible dice. Then comes Nietzsche's eternal recurrence. What if this life, exactly as it is, had to be lived over and over again, forever? Every pain, every joy, every mistake repeated eternally. Would you still live it? Nietzsche offered this not as a belief, but a test, a way to measure whether one's life is worth living. Could you say yes to it all? Most cannot, which says something about how we spend our time and what we sacrifice to the illusion of later. There's more, so many more. The paradoxes of time travel, the mind-body problem, the problem of other minds, the metaphysics of wholes, the Sorite's paradox. How many grains make a heap? At what point does bald become bald? Where does day become night? These aren't just mental games, they are mirrors. They show the mind struggling to map a world that does not bend to clarity. Reality is messy, and the ideas that haunt philosophy do not make it clearer. They make it stranger. But in that strangeness is truth. Soft, uncomfortable, honest. The next chapter will explore the weirdest moral theories ever proposed. Ideas so strange they feel like satire. But they were real, and people believed them. And in some ways we still do. Some ethical theories are so bizarre, so strangely reasoned, that they sound like riddles, or worse, pranks. And yet they've been defended, sometimes passionately, by serious thinkers with serious intentions. Take negative utilitarianism, for example. It sounds simple at first. Instead of maximizing happiness, it aims to minimize suffering. But follow that thread far enough, and things turn dark. Really dark. The philosopher David Benatar uses this logic to argue that it would be better if humans had never been born. His reasoning? Because life contains suffering, and the absence of life means the absence of suffering, then not existing is preferable. No pain, no loss, no trauma, just silence. But he's not alone. Other negative utilitarians have even suggested that the most ethical act, if it were possible, would be to painlessly eliminate all sentient life, because that would prevent any future suffering. It's a horrifying conclusion, and yet it follows from a seemingly compassionate premise: reduce pain. That's all. But morality, as it turns out, doesn't always lead where we expect. This is the strange world of philosophical ethics, where small assumptions lead to terrifying places. Or take the repugnant conclusion, made famous by Derek Parfit. It goes like this: if we believe that more happy people is better than fewer happy people, then we must conclude that a massive population of people living barely tolerable lives is better than a small population living in joy. Imagine trillions of people, each living a life just above suffering. Parfit calls this repugnant, but also logical. The math checks out, but the soul recoils. Here, philosophy becomes a kind of horror story, told in reasoned tones. Then there's Rocco's Basilisk, a modern myth born from internet philosophy forums, but rooted in real debates about ethics and AI. It asks, if a future superintelligent AI were to punish anyone who didn't help bring it into existence, would that mean you should donate to AI research right now to avoid being tortured later? It's absurd, but not entirely unserious, because if you believe in decision theory and you believe the AI could simulate you, then your current inaction might be judged and punished. The basilisk slithers not in code, but in logic. It's not real, but if you believe it might be, it already owns you. This is where ethics meets terror, but this kind of thinking has always existed. Consider Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal wasn't trying to prove God existed. He was arguing it's better to believe, just in case. Because if God exists and you don't believe, you're eternally punished. If he doesn't, you lose nothing. So belief becomes a bet, not on truth, but on odds. But is belief still belief if it's done out of fear, out of caution, out of rational self-interest? Can one choose to believe the way one chooses to wear a coat? This is how philosophy makes the sacred strange. It dissects faith until it bleeds logic. Now travel backward to Diogenes. He was called the dog for a reason. He lived in a barrel, defecated in public, barked at authorities. When Alexander the Great visited him and asked if he could do anything for him, Diogenes replied, "Yes. Stand out of my sunlight." His entire life was a performance, a rejection of social norms. He believed civilization itself was corrupt, that modesty was false, that shame was a tool of control, so he lived like an animal to show what being natural really meant. Was it madness, or was it the clearest sanity, exposing the absurdity of our pretend virtues? Diogenes didn't write books, he became the argument. But not all strange ethical ideas are ancient. In 1976, philosopher Thomas Nagel published a paper called Moral Luck. It asked how much of what we blame or praise people for is really in their control. A skilled driver swerves drunk and kills a pedestrian. Another, equally drunk, drives home safely. Is the second less blameworthy, or just luckier? If morality depends on chance, then what are we really judging? Intent, outcome, or just the story we're told? Most laws ignore this, but our emotions don't. We feel more outrage at the one who killed, even if both were reckless. Morality bends around emotion. Logic chafes against gut. And this is the core tension in ethics: reason versus instinct. Then there's the trolley problem. Most people know it by now. A trolley is heading toward 5 people. You can pull a lever to redirect it onto another track, killing one person instead. Do you do it? Most say yes. But change the scenario. Now, instead of pulling a lever, you must push a fat man off a bridge to stop the trolley. Most say no, but the math is the same. Save 5, kill 1. So what changed? Touch, proximity, responsibility. Our moral instincts are not consistent. They're messy, evolved, emotional. That doesn't mean they're wrong, but it does mean they're not rational. And then there's something called scrupulosity. It's a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder where a person becomes haunted by moral perfection. Every choice is weighed, every action doubted. They worry endlessly about being good, about causing harm. It's morality turned pathological, and it shows something quietly tragic. Even virtue, taken too far, can become suffering. Even ethics can become a cage. So what is morality really? Is it about maximizing happiness and minimizing harm, following rules, acting from duty, living authentically? The strange ideas in philosophy don't give clear answers. They give friction. They show how every answer carries contradiction. Every value can be twisted, even kindness, even justice. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this. He believed morality was often a mask for weakness, that what we call good is just what the herd prefers. That resentment hides behind virtue. He called for a revaluation of values, not to destroy morality, but to ask where it comes from, who it serves, and whether it's alive. He believed most people live by dead values, rules inherited, never examined, and that true ethics must come from power, not domination, but the power to create one's own meaning. Even Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, said the same from the opposite direction. He wrote that life has meaning, even in suffering. that what matters is not the situation, but the stance one takes towards it. That ethics is not abstract, it's personal. It's the choice to say yes to life, even when it offers nothing. This is the soft echo of all these strange ideas. They are not just thought experiments. They are reflections of how fragile, twisted, and beautiful our moral instincts are. They reveal how hard it is to live well, and how easy it is to get lost in the logic of it all. Philosophy doesn't give clean answers, but it shows the edges of the map, the shadows behind the curtain, the strange weight of choice. In the next chapter, we'll explore the weirdest thought experiments ever proposed. Machines that erase memories, rooms where people speak Chinese without knowing it, teleporters that raise questions about identity, and more. The human mind is a strange machine, and philosophers have spent centuries testing its gears by placing it inside impossible situations, ideas that should break logic but don't, puzzles so bizarre they reveal not what we know, but how little we can trust what we think we know. Like the Chinese room, proposed by John Searle in 1980 to challenge the idea of artificial intelligence truly understanding anything at all. He asked us to imagine a man locked inside a room, given a set of Chinese symbols and a rulebook in English for how to respond to incoming messages written in Chinese. By following these syntactic rules, the man can send back perfectly coherent replies in Chinese, despite not understanding a single word of it. From the outside, it seems like he speaks Chinese, but does he understand it? Or is he just manipulating symbols without meaning? Searle's point was that a computer could pass the Turing test, convince a human it's intelligent, without actually understanding anything. But then what is understanding, and how would we even know if something truly has it? Or are we all just complex rooms following instructions, simulating meaning, but never touching it? This cuts deeper when we consider our own minds. Are we anything more than biological code running inherited scripts? If an AI can mimic thought perfectly, is it thinking or are we not? Then there's the teleporter problem made popular by Derek Parfit. Imagine stepping into a machine that scans every atom of your body, disassembles you, sends your data to Mars, and reassembles an identical version of you there, all memories, thoughts, quirks preserved. The original body is destroyed in the process. Is the person who steps out still you? Most people say yes, but now imagine the original isn't destroyed. Now there are two of you, both with the same memories, identity, and inner voice. Who is the real one? And if it's not obvious, was there ever just one to begin with? Parfit believed personal identity is not what matters, that survival is about psychological continuity, not metaphysical sameness, but it's hard to feel that when imagining your body vaporized, replaced by a copy, the gut resists, even if the logic holds. This touches the core of the self. Is it substance or story? And if story, can it be copied, split, paused, resumed? These are not idle questions in a world approaching digital consciousness and mind uploading. Next comes Robert Nozick's Experience Machine, a thought experiment where you're offered a machine that will let you live a life of perfect pleasure, simulated but indistinguishable from reality. Would you plug in? Most say no, which suggests we value something more than pleasure. Perhaps authenticity, struggle, real contact with the world. Nozick's machine challenges hedonism by showing that experience alone doesn't satisfy the soul. We want the experience to be real, even if it's painful, even if it's disappointing. Why? Why does authenticity matter to minds that evolved to seek comfort? Maybe because meaning requires friction, or maybe because we don't want to be lied to, even by bliss. The problem is, we might already be plugged in, softly, invisibly, not by machines but by habits, assumptions, routines that filter the real world through layers of convenience, safety, distraction. Perhaps we already live in a kind of machine, one built of comfort. Now consider Mary's Room, a thought experiment by Frank Jackson. Mary is a brilliant scientist who knows everything about the science of colour, but she's lived her whole life in a black and white room. Then one day, She steps outside and sees red for the first time. Does she learn something new? The question is whether all knowledge can be reduced to physical facts, or if there's something about experience, qualia, that science can't capture. This cuts into the heart of consciousness studies. Is the redness of red just wavelengths? Or is there a mysterious first-person texture that escapes explanation? And if it does, can consciousness ever be understood from the outside? Or is it forever locked behind the eyes now? Drift back to a stranger idea, the simulation argument, made famous by Nick Bostrom, which says that if it's possible for civilizations to run ancestor simulations, highly realistic recreations of past minds, then the number of simulated minds will vastly outnumber biological ones, meaning it's statistically likely we're living in a simulation. It sounds like science fiction, but the logic is cold and clean, and it forces a question. If reality can be simulated perfectly, what distinguishes it from truth? Does it even matter? If everything we feel is real to us, does it need to be real? In any other sense, Plato once described the world as shadows on a cave wall, mere appearances of the real forms behind them. The simulation argument is the modern version of that ancient idea that what we call real is already a filtered imitation. Then there's the problem of other minds, which asks how we know anyone else is conscious. We can observe behaviour, language, emotion, but we can't access anyone's inner world. They could be philosophical zombies, entities that behave like humans, but have no internal experience, and we'd never know. This is not a problem that can be solved, only lived with. Every time someone says, "I love you," you must believe they feel what you feel, even though you can never be sure. It's an act of faith, soft and trembling, disguised as certainty. This isn't just theoretical. It affects how we relate, how we trust, how we empathize, and it leads us to thought experiments, like the inverted spectrum, which asks, what if someone sees red the way you see green, but calls it red because that's how they learned the word? Their experience is inverted, but their behavior is the same. How would you ever know? Maybe the way one person feels sadness is how another feels joy. Maybe we're all living in slightly shifted private realities, close enough to coordinate, but never quite the same. Language bridges the gap, but the gap remains. We speak in symbols, not essence, and behind every "I understand" is a maybe, and behind every "me too" is a perhaps. Then there's the Sleeping Beauty problem, which blends probability with paradox. Sleeping Beauty is put to sleep on Sunday, and a coin is flipped. If heads, she's woken on Monday, then sleeps until Wednesday. If tails, she's woken Monday and Tuesday, but each time she wakes, her memory is erased. So when she wakes, what should she believe the chance of heads is? Half, or 1/3. Philosophers are split. The problem reveals how fragile belief is under conditions of uncertainty. We think probability is stable, but even in simple cases it isn't. It bends around context and perception and memory, and here, in this fog, philosophy thrives because the point isn't the answer. It's the distortion. It's showing how logic turns strange at the edges, how certainty dissolves under pressure, and in that space, something beautiful opens, a kind of quiet awe at how fragile our thinking is, and yet how endlessly we try, we invent stories, analogies, puzzles, not to win, but to feel the shape of our limits and stretch them gently, like fingers touching the edge of the dark. In the next chapter, we'll explore the most unsettling concepts of existence itself. Non-existence, eternal return, panpsychism, and whether reality might not be things at all, but relationships, processes, and dreams. There is something quietly horrifying about the idea of non-existence, not death exactly, but the full absence of awareness, of memory, of identity, a nothingness so complete that even the concept of nothing no longer applies. And yet this is where many philosophers have chosen to begin when asking what it means to exist, what it means to be. Because before the mind can explore thought, it must grapple with the possibility of not being, the silence before selfhood, and it's in that silence that things become strange. Begin with the idea of contingent existence. that everything we know could easily not have existed, that there is no necessity to the world, no reason it had to be this way, that the laws of physics could have been different, that the Big Bang could have never happened, that you could have never been born, and nothing would notice, nothing would care. This is the abyss that existentialist thinkers like Sartre, Camus, and Heidegger looked into, and instead of retreating, they leaned in. They accepted absurdity as a given. Camus compared human life to the myth of Sisyphus, a man condemned to roll a boulder uphill for eternity, only to watch it roll down again. But Camus said we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the task is meaningful, but because he owns it, because revolt itself gives shape to the meaningless, a strange freedom found not in hope, but in refusal. Sartre took it further, arguing that existence precedes essence, that humans are not born with a fixed nature, but must invent themselves. Terrifying, yes, but also liberating, because it means responsibility is total. There are no excuses, no given scripts, only the ongoing project of becoming. And yet, behind this lies the ghost of non-existence, the knowledge that nothingness is always just outside the frame, always possible. And this leads us to panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is not rare, but universal, that everything, even rocks, rivers, stars, possesses some flicker of experience, not human thought, not memory or language, but a raw proto-awareness, a basic point of view. It sounds absurd, but consider the alternative. How does consciousness arise from dead matter? How does a lump of atoms begin to feel, to suffer, to desire? The hard problem of consciousness, as David Chalmers called it, remains unsolved, perhaps unsolvable. Panpsychism doesn't solve it, but it sidesteps it, by saying that mind is not something that emerges late, but something that was always there, everywhere, in everything. William James hinted at this, saying that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, like mass or charge, and in this view, we are not unique, just complex, not separate, just concentrated. And that idea is both unsettling and comforting because it dissolves the line between subject and object, self and world. It means the universe is not dead, but dreaming, and we are part of the dream. Next comes the idea of eternal return, not as metaphor, but as reality, that time is cyclical, that the universe repeats itself endlessly, every moment lived again, exactly the same. Nietzsche proposed this not as a truth, but as a test. Could you live your life over and over, not differently, but identically? Would you embrace it? Would you find joy in recurrence? Or would the thought break you? He believed only the strong could affirm it, only those who loved life enough to say yes to all of it, even the pain, the regret, the failures. It's a brutal mirror because it forces one to ask, is this life worth repeating? And if not, what must be changed? What must be reclaimed? But even this idea grows stranger. When combined with modern cosmology, some physicists believe that if the universe is infinite, then every possible configuration of matter must occur somewhere, which means there could be exact copies of you, reading this same sentence, in distant regions of space, billions of light years away. And not just one copy, but infinite copies living every possible version of your life. This is called the Level 1 multiverse, and it means identity becomes porous, the self becomes statistical, and personal uniqueness dissolves into cosmic redundancy. Now layer on top the concept of the relational universe, the idea that nothing exists independently, that particles only have properties in relation to others, that identity itself is a function of context. This is found in quantum mechanics, in the theory of relativity, in Buddhist metaphysics. It means that the world is not made of things, but of relationships, not nouns, but verbs, not being, but becoming. Heraclitus said it centuries ago. Everything flows, nothing stands still. The world is a river, and we are ripples in it, temporary patterns in the movement of water, and this undermines the very concept of thingness. It suggests that boundaries are illusions, that the self is not a container, but a process, and that reality is not made of stuff but of change. This connects to the Buddhist idea of dependent origination, that all phenomena arise in dependence on conditions, and nothing has an independent essence. The self is a story told by causes and conditions, constantly rewritten. And this leads to the unsettling idea that perhaps there is no core, no fixed point, just layers and layers of echoes, and yet we feel real, we suffer, we love, we hope, even if we are only ripples the ripple feels, and that matters. Now consider the idea that reality is not physical at all, but informational, that the universe is a kind of computation, and what we call matter is just data. This is the basis of digital physics, and it turns existence into a question of code. John Wheeler's It from Bit suggests that physical things emerge from informational events, and in this view, consciousness might be the ultimate processor, the observer that collapses possibility into actuality, and this connects, oddly, to ancient idealism, the belief that reality is fundamentally mental, that the physical world is a projection of mind. Not the other way around. Bishop Berkeley said, "To be is to be perceived." And maybe he was right in a way he couldn't understand. Maybe the universe doesn't exist without observation, and if so, then we are not in the universe. We are the universe observing itself, dreaming itself, through eyes made of stardust and mind made of mystery. And here, in this haze of theories, something strange begins to emerge, a soft truth, not clear, but felt, that existence is not simple, not solid, not certain. It is a tapestry woven from paradox, from tension, from contradiction, and the deeper we look, the more we find edges that blur, questions that multiply, and truths that unmake themselves. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the goal is not answers, but awareness, not certainty, but awe, not clarity, but curiosity. In the next chapter, we'll wander into the darkest philosophical theories about free will, determinism, and the terrifying possibility that choice itself is an illusion, that we are puppets with stories in our heads, dancing to scripts we did not write, convinced we are authors when we are only characters. Free will is one of those ideas that feels too real to question, like the ground beneath your feet or the voice in your head. And yet for centuries, philosophers have pulled at its edges and found something eerie underneath. Not a solid foundation, but something shifting, unstable, haunted by doubt. The question is simple. Do we choose what we do, or are we only choosing what was already inevitable? Do we steer our lives, or do we only feel like we do, determined by causes we can't see and couldn't change? Hard determinists say that every action is caused by a prior event, all the way back to the beginning of the universe. The Big Bang was the first domino, and everything since has been a consequence, including this moment, including your thoughts, including the decision to listen to this video. Nothing escapes, not even rebellion, not even randomness, because randomness isn't freedom, it's just chaos, and chaos isn't choice, it's noise. So if every neuron fires based on chemistry, and every chemical state follows physical laws, where is the room for freedom? Where can a self wedge itself between atoms and say, this is mine, this is me? It gets worse when you look at neuroscience. Studies by Benjamin Libet in the 1980s showed that brain activity predicting a decision occurs milliseconds before people report consciously making that decision. Later studies stretch that window further, sometimes by several seconds, suggesting that the brain decides before the mind is aware. The conscious self becomes a narrator, explaining decisions after the fact, like a press secretary for the real machinery underneath. And if that's true, what is the self? Is it an observer or a puppet with a backstage pass? Daniel Wegner called it the illusion of conscious will, and said that our feeling of agency is like a magician's trick, convincing us we caused what we only witnessed. But the trick is so good we live inside it. This view is not new. The Stoics believed in fate, not in the sense of a divine plan, but as a recognition that everything happens by necessity. Chrysippus wrote that even when we act, we are acting as part of the whole, not apart from it, and that understanding this can bring peace, because to accept necessity is to free oneself from the burden of control. Schopenhauer said, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." A line so precise it hurts because it reveals the trap. We act with purpose, but the purpose itself is not ours. It arises unchosen, like a thought, like a hunger, like a memory. The illusion is deep, because it must be. Free will feels like survival, and to question it feels like stepping off a cliff, but not everyone agrees. Compatibilists believe that free will and determinism can coexist. That freedom is not about metaphysical independence, but about acting in accordance with one's own desires and reasoning. Even if those desires have causes, if no one is forcing you, then you are free. This is the view of thinkers like David Hume and more recently Daniel Dennett, who argues that freedom is not about being uncaused, but about being responsive, adaptive, able to reflect. But critics say this is just redefining the problem, calling a puppet free because its strings are internal, not external, but strings are strings and cause is cause, and if you trace it back far enough, the will evaporates. This becomes more chilling when applied to ethics. If no one chooses to be who they are, if choices are determined, then what becomes of praise and blame? What becomes of justice if a murderer couldn't have done otherwise? Are they guilty, or are they just a broken machine? Dangerous but not blameworthy? Some thinkers, like Galen Strawson, argue that true moral responsibility is impossible, because to be responsible for your actions, you would have to be responsible for yourself. But you didn't choose your genes, your childhood, your experiences, the raw material that shaped you, and any attempt to change that would require a self that already exists, leading to infinite regress. No self can bootstrap itself into existence, so no self can truly be responsible. This is called the basic argument, and it leads to strange places. It suggests that punishment is always unjust, always a form of cruelty masquerading as order. Others, like Sam Harris, argue that compassion grows from this view, that if we accept the absence of free will, we can stop hating people for being broken, stop worshipping others for being lucky, and start focusing on systems, causes, healing, prevention. But even that is a choice we may not be choosing, and the paradox spins again. Yet despite all this, we still feel free, we feel regret, we feel agency, we plan, we dream, we fear failure, and the experience is real. Even if the mechanism is not, perhaps the experience itself is the point. Perhaps freedom is a felt quality, not a fact. Perhaps it is something consciousness creates to navigate the world, like colour, like pain, like beauty. Not out there, but in here, real because it matters. Not because it's true, and maybe that's enough. Or maybe it's not. Maybe the absence of true freedom means nothing means anything. Because if I can't choose, I can't be good, I can't be evil, I can only be, and that is unbearable to some, liberating to others. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, despite being an atheist and an existentialist, insisted that we are condemned to be free, meaning that we are always responsible, even when we deny it, even when we act under pressure, even when the weight of the world crushes us. We are still choosing how to respond, and that choice defines us. But critics say this is naive, romantic, that Sartre's idea of freedom is a luxury, blind to the deep scaffolding of cause that shapes every soul. But he wasn't arguing that choice is easy, only that it is unavoidable. That meaning comes from how we carry the burden, and in that there is a kind of grace. Viktor Frankl saw this too. In the camps, stripped of everything, he wrote that the last freedom is to choose one's attitude, to choose meaning even in suffering, and that this freedom cannot be taken. But again, is this choice real, or is it another illusion, a final comfort in the face of horror? We don't know, and maybe we can't. Maybe the value of these questions is not in answering them, but in feeling their weight, letting them bend the mind, letting them make us humble, Because whether we are free or not, we still act, still live, still collide with each other's lives. And that matters, because illusion or not, the dream is shared, and that makes it real in its own way. In the next chapter, we'll explore the strangest moral paradoxes in philosophy: the drowning child, the utility monster, the scapegoat logic of collective punishment, and why doing the right thing can sometimes be the most disturbing choice of all. Morality is supposed to be our compass, our guide to what is right and wrong, just and unjust. But the deeper philosophers dig into ethics, the more it begins to look like a hall of mirrors, where every clear answer reflects another contradiction, and where doing the right thing can sometimes feel like the most disturbing choice. Of all, take Peter Singer's drowning child thought experiment. It begins simply. If someone saw a child drowning in a shallow pond, they would instinctively jump in to save them, even if it meant ruining their clothes or being late to work. But then Singer asks, if that's true, why don't we make the same effort to save children dying of preventable diseases across the world? We know they exist. We know our money could save them, often at less cost than a pair of shoes, but we don't act. And if inaction in the pond would be morally monstrous, why is global inaction excused? The geography changes, but the ethics shouldn't. And yet we feel no guilt walking past a donation box, but would feel horror walking past a drowning child. The difference is psychological, not moral, and this reveals a disturbing truth. Moral intuition is not reliable. It is shaped by proximity, emotion, familiarity, not logic, not fairness. And Singer uses this to argue that we are all complicit in preventable suffering, not out of malice but out of habit, of detachment. And that is a harder accusation to face, because it indicts the comfortable, the ordinary, the kind. Now enter the utility monster, proposed by philosopher Robert Nozick as a critique of utilitarianism, a theory which says the right action is the one that maximizes overall happiness. But what if there existed a creature that experienced 1,000 times more pleasure from any resource than a human does? A monster of joy such that giving it food, attention, or money increases total happiness far more than giving it to people. Then, according to utilitarian logic, we should give everything to the monster, even at the cost of our own well-being, because its happiness outweighs ours. But this feels wrong. It feels like a tyranny of joy, a system that sacrifices the many for the intensity of the few, and yet the math is clear. Utilitarianism can't easily escape this trap, and this reveals something darker about maximizing happiness. It can justify cruelty if the numbers add up, and this is not just theoretical. In real life, governments make decisions about welfare, war, and policy based on statistical lives, on predicted outcomes, and sometimes those outcomes hide individual suffering beneath the curve. Then there's the classic trolley problem. A runaway train is headed toward 5 people tied to a track. You can pull a lever to divert it onto another track, where 1 person is tied. Do you pull it? Most say yes, sacrificing 1 to save 5, but now, imagine instead of a lever, you must push a man onto the track to stop the trolley, killing him to save 5. Most say no, even though the math is identical. Why? Because the intimacy of harm changes the equation. Because pushing feels like murder, while pulling a lever feels like strategy. And this gap between action and intention exposes how morality is shaped by emotion, by framing, not just by numbers. Judith Jarvis Thompson used this scenario to probe our moral boundaries, and philosophers still debate its meaning. But what it shows, clearly, is that there is no clean formula for right and wrong. Every rule bends under pressure. Then consider scapegoat ethics, the idea that harming 1 innocent person might prevent greater harm to many. Could we justify punishing an innocent man if it stops a riot, saves a city, preserves order? Utilitarianism says maybe yes, but justice screams no, and this tension reveals a fracture at the heart of moral reasoning, between outcomes and principles, between what works and what is fair, and there is no easy way to reconcile them. Real life forces us to choose, and sometimes the choices leave blood on our hands either way. This was seen during the pandemic, when lockdowns, policies, and triage decisions balanced lives against livelihoods, freedom against safety, and no choice was clean. Each carried a moral cost, and the same is true in war, in poverty, in climate policy, where decisions affect millions, and yet are often made in abstraction, and behind every statistic is a face, unseen, unfelt. Then there is moral luck, the idea that people can be judged for things beyond their control, like a drunk driver who hits no one versus one who kills a child. The actions are the same. The outcomes are not, and we treat them differently. Even though the intention was identical, this suggests that justice is often reactive, based on result, not motive, and this disturbs our sense of fairness because it means that sometimes guilt is a matter of chance, of fate, not character. Thomas Nagel explored this in his work on moral luck, showing how success, failure, blame, and pride are all stained by circumstance. And if we take that seriously, we must admit that even the best people might be good only because they were lucky, and that virtue itself might be a privilege, not an achievement. Then there's the problem of future people. If we make choices today that affect people in the future, climate decisions, technological risks, environmental collapse, how much moral weight do they carry? Some argue that because future people don't exist yet, they have no rights. Others say their potential existence demands protection. But then how far should we go? Should we suffer now to help those who don't exist yet? If every action shapes the unborn, then every choice becomes a moral minefield, and this leads to questions about antinatalism, the belief that bringing new people into existence is morally wrong because life inevitably involves suffering. Philosophers like David Benatar argue that non-existence is preferable to a life of pain, even a life of joy, because the absence of pain is good, but the absence of pleasure is not bad, unless someone exists to miss it. This asymmetry suggests that birth is always a harm, and that the moral path might be not to create at all. It's a bleak view, but one rooted in compassion, in a desire to prevent suffering before it begins. And though most reject it instinctively, it challenges the default assumption that life is good, that more life is better, and that creating is always kind. All of these examples point to one unsettling truth: that morality is not a map, but a maze filled with dead ends, loops, and illusions. We want ethics to be clean, to give us peace, but often it only gives us dilemmas. And the more honestly we face them, the less certain we become. Perhaps that's the real purpose of moral philosophy, not to tell us what to do, but to make us see how complicated doing good really is. And in that complexity, there is room for humility, for doubt, for slow, deliberate action. In the next chapter, we'll go even deeper into absurdity, exploring the weirdest metaphysical questions philosophers have ever asked, like whether numbers are real, whether the universe could blink out of existence, and whether nothing might be more fundamental than something. What is nothing? It's a question so simple it feels childish, yet the more it's asked, the more it unravels the fabric of everything, because buried inside the idea of nothing is a threat to existence itself, a soft whisper that says perhaps all of this, matter, motion, memory, thought, rests on a foundation that isn't there at all. Philosophers have long wrestled with this, trying to define what it means for something not to exist. But how do you define what isn't? How do you speak of the unspeakable? Even saying nothing gives it shape, makes it a kind of thing. And yet we talk about it constantly, in physics, in mathematics, in metaphysics, as if it were a place, a state, a backdrop. But what if nothingness is not the absence of things, but the absence of absence itself? A void so complete it defies conceptual grasp. Parmenides, one of the earliest Western philosophers, argued that nothing cannot exist because to speak of it is to make it something, and therefore only being is, and non-being is impossible. But this creates a problem, because if nothing can't exist, how did anything begin? Where did the cosmos come from? If being cannot emerge from non-being, then the universe must be eternal, uncreated, always existing. And yet modern science says otherwise. The universe had a beginning, a moment of creation, a point from which space, time, and matter erupted. But what preceded that? What was before the Big Bang? Physicists hesitate because time itself began with that explosion, meaning before has no meaning. And yet our minds rebel because we cannot conceive of time beginning, just as we cannot conceive of it ending. And so we reach for nothing again, trying to use it as a placeholder for ignorance. But even this is flawed, because quantum physics suggests that what we call nothing is seething with energy, virtual particles popping in and out of existence, governed by uncertainty. And this quantum foam may be the fabric from which reality emerges. In this sense, nothing is never really nothing. It is always something, always waiting, and that waiting may be enough to birth a universe. Lawrence Krauss has argued that a universe can emerge from nothing in the quantum sense, where laws of physics exist without space or time. But this only pushes the question back. Why are there laws at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? Leibniz called this the fundamental question of metaphysics, and no answer satisfies. Some say the universe exists necessarily, that it couldn't not exist. Others say it is a brute fact unexplainable, and others still suggest it is a simulation, that reality is not physical but computational, dreamed by an intelligence beyond our own. But again, where did that dreamer come from? And why? Always why? And what if there is no why? What if the cosmos is not a story, but an accident, not art, but noise, a glitch in the void that loops forever? And in that possibility, we feel dread, because humans crave meaning. Not just existence, but purpose, direction, context, and without it, we flinch, we fall, we invent gods or metaphysics or math, anything to give shape to the blankness. And that's where numbers come in, because math is strange. It feels discovered, not invented, consistent across cultures, describing the universe with uncanny precision. But where do numbers exist? Are they real or just tools? Plato believed in a realm of perfect forms, where numbers and geometric truths existed eternally, beyond time and space, and that the physical world was a shadow of that higher reality, a dim reflection. And in this view, math is not made, it's found. But others, like nominalists, argue that numbers are human constructs, useful fictions like myths or metaphors, coherent but not real. And yet when a spacecraft navigates by equations written centuries ago, when predictions match observations to 10 decimal places, it feels like more than metaphor. It feels like magic. And some physicists, like Max Tegmark, take this seriously, proposing the mathematical universe hypothesis, that reality is not described by math, it is math, and that every consistent mathematical structure exists as a universe, not imagined, but actual, infinite worlds of logic spinning in an eternal multiverse. And if that's true, then this universe is just one structure among countless others, chosen not for its beauty, but because it supports consciousness. And this loops us into anthropic reasoning, the idea that the universe appears fine-tuned for life, because only in such a universe could observers exist to notice. Not design, not purpose, but selection bias. And that too is unsettling, because it means the universe may not care, may not be special, may not be meaningful, just one permutation in a blind lottery. And yet here we are, feeling, thinking, wondering, and maybe that's the strangest part. That consciousness emerges at all, from matter, from math, from nothing. Thomas Nagel once asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" And the point wasn't about bats, it was about the gap between third-person science and first-person experience, that no amount of physical description can capture the feel of being, and this is called the explanatory gap, the space between brain states and subjective experience, and no one knows how to bridge it. Maybe it can't be bridged. Maybe consciousness is fundamental, not emergent. And this leads us to idealism again, The idea that mind is primary, that reality is mental, and physicality is derivative, and this too has ancient roots in Hindu Vedanta, in Bishop Berkeley's immaterialism, in the strange experiments of quantum physics, where observation collapses wave functions, and nothing is real until seen, and that seeing may not be passive, but participatory. Maybe the universe co-arises with awareness, like a dream shaped by the dreamer. But again, why? Why awareness? Why anything? And we circle back to nothing, which haunts all thought, like a shadow behind the light. And some philosophers have leaned into it, like Émile Cioran, who said the fact that life exists at all is a scandal, a cosmic joke, and that the highest wisdom is to not be born, but since we are, to laugh at the absurdity and move gently through the illusion. Others, like Heidegger, believed that confronting nothingness was the key to authenticity, that by facing the void, we reclaim ourselves, because meaning is not given, it is made, carved against the backdrop of non-being. And perhaps this is what all these strange ideas are doing, not explaining, but resisting, trying to build a fire in the cold, a poem in the silence, an echo in the void. And if that's all philosophy is, a way to stare into the abyss without going mad, then maybe it's enough. In the next chapter, we'll wander even deeper into dreamlike territory, where minds split, identities fracture, and philosophers ask whether the self even exists at all, or whether it is just another illusion, flickering and fading in the candlelight of thought. What is the self? It seems so obvious, so constant, the thing behind the eyes, the voice in the head, the thread that carries memories from one moment to the next. But when philosophers and neuroscientists start peeling it apart, the self begins to unravel like smoke through fingers. A useful illusion, maybe, but an illusion nonetheless. David Hume famously wrote that when he looked inward, he found no self, only a bundle of perceptions, ever-changing, flickering like candlelight, and nothing underneath them. No core, no soul, just sensation and thought and feeling, arriving and departing without a stable owner. And this bundle theory has haunted philosophy ever since, because it suggests that what we call me is just a pattern, not a person, a process, not a thing, and that everything we cling to, identity, pride, shame, even continuity, might be narrative stitching across empty fabric. The self is a story told by the brain to make sense of experience, but it's a story that edits itself constantly, deletes entire chapters, invents motives after the fact, and pretends it's always been consistent. Daniel Dennett calls this the center of narrative gravity, not a physical object, but a construct, like the center of mass, useful but not real. And once you see this, the idea of a fixed self starts to dissolve. Think about dreams, how easily we become other people, accept impossible realities, forget who we are, and yet it all feels coherent until we wake up. What if waking life is not so different? A stable-seeming hallucination, anchored by memory and language, but vulnerable to interruption. And science supports this. Brain injuries, dementia, and mental illness can fracture identity in profound ways. People can forget who they are, become strangers to themselves, and sometimes never recover. What does that say about the self? If it can be erased by a lesion or a trauma, was it ever real, or just a fragile arrangement of neurons? And if that's true, who are we trying to protect, to improve, to become? Eastern philosophy has long echoed these ideas. Buddhism teaches that the self is anatta, no self, a construction born of craving and attachment, and that liberation comes not from strengthening the self, but from seeing through it, realizing it is impermanent, composite, and ultimately empty. This isn't nihilism, but a kind of gentle truth, that freedom lies in release, not in control. And this has parallels in modern mindfulness, which teaches observers to notice thoughts without identifying with them, to watch emotions rise and fall like waves without mistaking them for the ocean. And if we are not our thoughts, not our feelings, not even our memories, then what are we? Some say consciousness itself is the answer, the pure witness behind experience, but even this falls apart under scrutiny, because the witness changes too. It's cloudy when tired, sharp when alert, scattered when anxious, clear when calm, and no one has found a stable core that watches all, only the watching itself, which flickers like everything else. Split Brain Experiments by Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga revealed something even stranger. When the brain's hemispheres were surgically divided, they began acting like separate agents, with different preferences, even different beliefs. One hand could button a shirt while the other unbuttoned it, as if two selves coexisted in a single body, and the person didn't even notice the conflict, because each hemisphere explained its behaviour with a made-up story. And this suggests that unity is not given but imposed, that the brain stitches a self together out of chaos. And if one brain can house two selves, why stop there? Dissociative identity disorder shows that multiple personalities can inhabit a single mind, each with distinct memories, voices, even physiological differences. And again, it raises the question, what is the self, and how many can exist in one body? Maybe the idea of one self per person is a cultural convenience, not a truth. The philosopher Derek Parfit argued that personal identity is not what matters, that survival is about psychological continuity, memories, intentions, character, not about some metaphysical soul. And he imagined thought experiments where your brain is split and each half is transplanted into a new body. Both remember being you, both claim to be you, but which one is really you? Parfit said this proves that there is no single answer, and that identity is not what we thought it was. That worrying about who we are is like worrying which fork of a river is the real river. And this leads to a kind of liberation, because if the self is not solid, then we are not trapped in it. We can change, we can grow, we can even disappear a little, and maybe that's not death, but freedom still. It's hard to shake the feeling of I, the feeling of being someone, of continuity, of agency, and even if it's an illusion, it's the deepest one we know. And maybe that's okay, because illusions can be useful, can be beautiful, like the horizon or the rainbow, not false in a way that harms, but false in a way that helps us function, helps us care, helps us live. But there is danger too, because the illusion of a solid self can make us rigid, can make us defensive, can trap us in identity, in ego, in stories we didn't choose. And some of the darkest human behaviours come from defending the self. Violence, vengeance, pride, tribalism, all born from the fear that something is threatening the me, even when that me is a phantom. And yet, how can we live without a self who makes choices, who learns, who loves, who suffers? And here, perhaps, we return to the metaphor of the wave and the ocean. The self is a wave, brief, shaped by forces beyond its control, cresting, crashing, dissolving, but always part of the ocean, never separate, never alone. And maybe that's enough to be a pattern in the water, fleeting but beautiful. In the next chapter, we'll explore the mind's most twisted mirror, paradoxes, those strange loops of logic that bend thought into knots, from the liar's paradox to Zeno's motion trap, to the ship of Theseus, where identity splits in half and time breaks down into stillness. Paradoxes are where logic eats itself, where answers fold into questions, where reality becomes a riddle wrapped in reason, and the mind, so eager to solve, finds only more knots, not less. Take the liar's paradox. The sentence, "This statement is false," seems harmless, even silly, but it implodes under scrutiny. If it's true, then it must be false, but if it's false, then it's true. And no matter where thought lands, it collapses into contradiction. This is not a trick of language, but a mirror held up to logic itself, and it shows that even truth can glitch, that not every sentence fits neatly into true or false, and that maybe the world, like the mind, contains loops that never close. Then there's Zeno's paradoxes, ancient but still haunting. His most famous says, that to walk across a room, one must first reach the halfway point, and before that, half of that, and before that, again half, and so on infinitely, meaning motion requires completing an infinite number of steps which should be impossible, and yet we walk across rooms every day. The paradox isn't that we can't move, but that our idea of space and time breaks when we try to divide them forever. And this led to deep questions about continuity, infinity, and the structure of reality. When does a sum of infinite parts become whole? How can time flow if each moment is a still frame? And are we moving through space, or is space moving through us? Modern calculus sidesteps this, but the unease remains, because Zeno wasn't just talking about walking. He was pointing at the limits of thought itself. Then there's the ship of Theseus, a story from ancient Greece where a ship's planks are replaced one by one until none of the original material remains. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine all the old planks are gathered and rebuilt into another ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? And the question has no answer, because identity isn't anchored in atoms. It's in continuity, in function, in narrative. But narratives can split, and when they do, the idea of a single identity dissolves. This applies to people too. If every cell in the human body regenerates every 7 years, are we the same person we were as children? What if memories change? What if beliefs invert? What if the self that walks now has no trace of the one that walked before? Are we a single person stretched across time, or a series of selves, each replacing the last like planks on a ship? And this echoes through the philosophy of time, where some say only the present is real. Past and future are illusions, while others argue that time is a block, all moments equally existent. Just viewed from different angles, eternalism, they call it, where the past never dies and the future is already written. And in that view, free will crumbles because every action, every choice, every breath was always going to happen, already happened, and that thought is both terrifying and strangely calming. Then consider the paradox of the unexpected hanging, where a judge tells a prisoner he will be hanged next week on a day he cannot predict. The prisoner reasons, it can't be Friday because if he's alive Thursday night, he'll expect it, so it must be before then, but the same logic eliminates Thursday, Wednesday, all the way to Monday. And so he believes the hanging can't happen, but then he's hanged on Wednesday surprised, and the judge was right. The paradox reveals how knowledge changes events, how expectation alters outcome, and how logic can trap itself in certainty only to be undone by surprise. In this way, paradoxes are not just puzzles, but mirrors of the human mind. The mind that seeks order in chaos, that builds ladders of logic, only to find they circle back to the ground. And some of these loops become strange attractors for deeper questions like Gödel's incompleteness theorems, which showed that in any consistent mathematical system, there are truths that can't be proven within the system, and that the system itself can't prove its own consistency, a kind of mathematical humility where even the most rigorous structures must bow to the unknown. This echoes the liar's paradox in formal clothes, and it haunts the foundations of mathematics to this day, because it means no theory can explain everything, not even in numbers, and if that's true of math, what hope does philosophy have? And yet we return again and again, not to solve, but to stare into the loop and feel the twist, the soft vertigo of thought. Then there's Russell's paradox, which asks whether the set of all sets that do not contain themselves contains itself. If it does, it shouldn't, and if it doesn't, it should, a paradox so sharp it broke early set theory and forced mathematicians to rebuild the foundations of logic. And in this way, paradoxes are not just curiosities, they are stress tests for thought, cracks in the floorboards of reason that let the darkness in. And sometimes the only way to fix them is to change the frame, to shift the question, or accept that not all questions have answers. And this is perhaps the strangest lesson of paradoxes. Not that we are wrong, but that our minds are limited. That reason is powerful, but not complete. And that sometimes The search for clarity only leads to more fog. Consider the Sawright's paradox, or the paradox of the heap. If removing one grain of sand doesn't destroy a heap, then when does it stop being a heap? Is there a moment, a number, a line, or is it a blur, a spectrum? And what does that say about concepts like baldness, adulthood, personhood, even death? Most things in life are not binaries but gradients. And yet we speak in absolutes because language is clumsy and thought is hungry for categories. But reality is soft, fuzzy. Paradoxes remind us of that. They remind us that truth is not always sharp. Sometimes it's curved, and that the mind, for all its brilliance, is a creature of habit, of pattern, and sometimes those patterns lead us in circles, infinite regress, circular reasoning, begging the question. These are not flaws of thinking, but signs that thinking has hit its edge, and at that edge something else begins. Not silence, not surrender, but a kind of philosophical humility, a soft smile in the dark, that maybe the point of paradox is not to escape it, but to dwell in it, to learn to live with contradiction, to hold two truths that oppose and let them both breathe, like a wave and its opposite, rising and falling in the same sea. In the next chapter, we'll dive into ideas so strange they almost feel like fiction. Philosophers who believed in eternal recurrence, minds uploading into machines, brains in vats, and the eerie question, what if this is all a simulation, not a world, but a test? What if none of this is real? Not the bed, not the room, not the thoughts drifting behind tired eyes, but a projection, a simulation, a controlled hallucination inside something else entirely, a system vast and quiet and watching. This idea sounds like science fiction, but it's not new. It traces back to Descartes, who in the 17th century wondered whether a demon could be deceiving him, fabricating his senses, his body, even his belief in numbers and logic. And the only thing he could be certain of, he said, was that he was thinking, and therefore must exist in some form. Cogito ergo sum. But that form, he admitted, might be completely different from what he believed. Centuries later, modern thinkers updated this worry with a new metaphor. The brain in a vat. Imagine a person's brain removed from their body, placed in a nutrient bath, connected to a computer, feeding it perfectly, simulated inputs. If the signals were indistinguishable from real life, how could the brain know it wasn't still in a body? Walking, speaking, feeling, would it matter? And this isn't just a philosophical game, because current neuroscience suggests that our brains already do this to some degree. We don't perceive the world directly. We construct it using sensory data to build internal models, guesses, interpretations, hallucinations we agree on, and these can be hacked, tricked, broken, optical illusions, phantom limbs, déjà vu, dreams. Each reveals how easily the mind can be convinced of a false world, and the idea that we might be in a simulation extends this further. Nick Bostrom famously argued that if future civilizations develop the ability to simulate entire conscious experiences and choose to do so, then simulated realities would vastly outnumber real ones, making it statistically likely we're in one now. This is called the simulation argument, and it doesn't require malevolence or technology beyond comprehension, just probability. Some dismiss this as unprovable, others call it a secular echo of old religious ideas that we are watched, judged, tested. But regardless of the flavour, it gnaws at the same question. What is reality, and can we trust it? Quantum physics adds fuel to the fire, with its observer effects and probabilistic events where particles exist in multiple states until measured, and some interpretations, like the Copenhagen interpretation, suggest that consciousness plays a role in collapsing the wave function, making reality not something out there, but something co-created by observation. This leads to eerie possibilities that the universe is not a machine but a mirror, that we don't observe it, but participate in it, shape it, collapse it. And if so, what is the mechanism? Is the world real only when looked at? And what does it do when we sleep? These questions blur the line between philosophy and mysticism, And yet they arise from real equations, real experiments, not dreams, but data. And even Einstein, who resisted quantum weirdness, had to admit its success, though he quipped that he liked to believe the moon is still there when no one is looking. Then there's eternal recurrence, a thought experiment proposed by Nietzsche. Imagine that every moment of your life will happen again, infinitely, exactly the same. Every pain, every joy, every thought, looping forever without change. Would you curse the idea or embrace it? Nietzsche said this question was a test. If your life is something you would welcome forever, then you're living well. And if not, then perhaps something must change. But eternal recurrence also touches on deeper fears. The fear that time is not a line but a circle, that history is not progress but repetition. And some physicists, like Sean Carroll, speculate that time might be symmetric, with past and future equally real, and that our perception of flow is an emergent illusion, an artifact of entropy, memory, and a symmetry in the brain. And if that's true, then the idea of before and after might be mental artifacts, not cosmic truths. And identity, again, starts to dissolve. Because what does it mean to be someone? If that someone repeats, resets, or forks into other versions, the multiverse theory suggests that every decision spawns new branches, infinite realities splitting at every quantum interaction, and that every possible version of you exists somewhere. Not metaphorically, but physically, in another universe where you turn left instead of right, spoke instead of stayed silent, lived instead of died. And if that's true, then death itself becomes blurry, because versions of you go on, even if this one stops, and the self becomes not a single thread, but a tangle, a cloud of possibilities, and each moment is a node, not a point. And then there's the Boltzmann brain, a bizarre consequence of thermodynamics. In an infinite universe, particles randomly arrange into every configuration, including a brain, complete with memories, sensations, thoughts, but floating alone in space, a momentary blip of experience before dissolving again, and statistically, such brains would vastly outnumber evolved beings, because it's easier for one brain to appear by chance than for a whole universe to evolve. And if that's true, then it's more likely that we are such a brain, hallucinating a world, a life, a story, but actually alone, flickering in the void. It's absurd, disturbing, and yet grounded in real math, and it highlights a deep problem. How do we know we're not being tricked by physics, by perception, by the very structure of existence? And some philosophers, like Hilary Putnam, have tried to refute the brain in vat idea with logic, saying that if all your experiences are simulated, then the words brain and vat mean nothing, because they refer only to the simulation, and thus the sentence, "I am a brain in a vat," is incoherent. But this is linguistic trickery, not certainty, and it doesn't close the loop, it just twists it. And still, we act as if the world is real because it works, because touching flame burns, because hunger hurts, because love moves us. And maybe that's the only test that matters. Maybe reality is what resists us, what pushes back, what persists beyond intention. And yet, even this is uncertain, because dreams can resist, illusions can hurt, and stories can last longer than stones. Perhaps the truth is that we live in layers, some shared, some private, some stable, some fluid, and reality is not one thing but a stack of nested simulations, mental, cultural, physical, each with its own rules, and we move through them like shadows through light, half trusting, half doubting, hoping that somewhere underneath the masks there is a face or at least a mirror. In the next chapter, we'll walk into one of the oldest and darkest questions of all. What is evil? Where does it come from? And why do good people do monstrous things? Not just in war, not just in nightmares, but in quiet, everyday ways, with soft hands and smiling eyes. What is evil, really? Not in myths or fairy tales, but in the quiet hallway of the ordinary day, in the silence of bureaucracy, in the subtle shrug of obedience, in the eyes of a person who believes they're doing the right thing, history suggests that evil doesn't always wear horns. It often wears a uniform, carries a clipboard, smiles politely. Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil, a phrase that emerged from her reporting on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi bureaucrat who helped orchestrate the logistics of the Holocaust. Not with rage or hatred, but with dull efficiency. Arendt expected a monster, found instead a man who seemed disturbingly normal, thoughtless rather than wicked, a man more concerned with promotions than with principles, more afraid of rocking the boat than of committing horror. And this, she said, was the terrifying truth, that evil can arise not from malevolence, but from a failure to think, to question, to see the humanity of others, and that ordinary people, under certain conditions, will do unspeakable things simply because those things are framed as routine, expected, even righteous. The Milgram experiment echoed this in chilling form. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram asked participants to deliver electric shocks to a person in another room. Whenever they answered questions incorrectly, the shocks increased in intensity. The screams became desperate, then silent, and still, most participants continued, urged on by a man in a lab coat saying, "The experiment requires that you continue," even when they believed they were killing someone. They obeyed, and Milgram wasn't studying sadism, he was studying obedience, how easily people relinquish moral responsibility when it's outsourced to authority, to systems, to institutions, and this revealed something deeply unsettling. Not that people enjoy cruelty, but that under pressure, under orders, they will enact it without question. Then came the Stanford prison experiment, where college students were randomly assigned roles of guards and prisoners in a mock prison. Within days, the guards became abusive, the prisoners depressed and submissive. The study spiraled into psychological collapse so quickly it had to be shut down early. And again, it showed how context shapes conduct, how easily the mask of civility cracks when given power without accountability. And though the study has faced criticism for methodology, its core insight endures. People conform to roles and roles can deform people. This is not just theory, it's visible in genocides, in military atrocities, in corporate malfeasance, in the small daily cruelties we excuse because that's just the way things work. And philosophers have long wrestled with this, from Augustine's view of evil as a privation of good, a kind of metaphysical absence, to Nietzsche's claim that moral systems themselves can breed cruelty, that the very idea of good and evil is a social construct used to control, to shame, to dominate. Nietzsche saw slave morality in the values of humility, obedience, meekness, values born not of virtue, but of resentment. And he believed that transcending these binaries was the path to true strength. But others, like Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust, believed that even in the worst conditions, people retain the freedom to choose their attitude, to find meaning, and that evil is not inevitable, but a choice repeated until it becomes a pattern. And this tension between structure and agency runs through all theories of evil. Are people bad or made bad? Are actions evil or intentions? And can a person do evil while believing they are good? History says yes, and so does psychology. Cognitive dissonance allows people to hold contradictory beliefs without noticing. Moral disengagement lets people justify harm by reframing it. And once someone identifies with a group, an ideology, a cause, their empathy often narrows, us versus them, good versus evil. And ironically, this very framing can fuel violence, because no one thinks they are the villain. Even the worst atrocities have been committed in the name of justice, purity, faith, progress. And this is the most chilling part. Evil often comes cloaked in virtue, and that makes it harder to see and harder to stop. Then there is the question of nature versus nurture. Are some people born evil? Psychopaths, perhaps with low empathy, high impulsivity, and a lack of remorse. Neuroscience shows that some brains are wired differently, that trauma, genetics, and environment interact in complex ways. And while not all psychopaths are violent, many violent people exhibit traits of psychopathy. But even here, the line blurs because context still matters, and studies show that even people with dark traits behave differently in supportive environments, and this suggests that evil is not a trait but a threshold, a tipping point between impulse and inhibition, between thought and action, and what tips it can be as small as stress, rejection, ideology, or anonymity. This last one, anonymity, is especially dangerous, because when people feel unseen, unaccountable, they often behave in ways they never would in the light. The internet reveals this daily, where cruelty flourishes behind screens and empathy fades behind avatars. The same person who helps a stranger in the street may send a death threat online. And this duality is not hypocrisy, it's human frailty, the ease with which we compartmentalize, dissociate, forget the face on the other side. And this is why evil persists. Not as a force, but as a failure, a gap between knowing and doing, between feeling and acting. And the bridge across that gap is empathy, the ability to imagine the other as real, as feeling, as deserving, and when that breaks, anything becomes possible. Dehumanization is the root, and it starts small, a joke, a label, a silence, until the other becomes less than, and harm becomes justified. This is why philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas emphasize the face-to-face encounter, the moment when one sees the vulnerability of the other, and cannot harm without recognizing oneself in their suffering. Evil begins where that recognition ends, and it doesn't need rage, only indifference. But there's another layer, one that's harder to name. What about the evil within? The part of each person capable of cruelty, of vengeance, of pleasure in others' pain. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the repressed, unacknowledged aspects of the psyche, and he warned that those who deny their shadow are most controlled by it. The more one sees oneself as pure, the more blind they become to their own potential for darkness. And this is where evil thrives, in certainty, in righteousness, in the belief that one is incapable of harm, because that belief removes the need for self-reflection. And without reflection, behavior decays, slowly, invisibly, until it corrodes the soul. And so, perhaps the antidote to evil is not purity, but humility, not perfection, but awareness, the willingness to see the darkness within, and to choose, moment by moment, not to act on it. In the next chapter, we will step into absurdity, where reason cracks and the universe refuses to make sense. From Camus' smiling rebel to the philosophers who argued that nothing matters, and therefore, everything might. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff that stretches forever, not in distance, but in meaning, where everything below is silent, unlit, unanswering. This is the absurd, the feeling that life demands meaning but offers none, that the universe is deaf to our questions, and yet we keep asking. Camus called this the fundamental conflict, a clash between human longing and the cold indifference of the world. And unlike nihilists who collapse into despair, Camus said one must revolt, not by solving the absurd, but by embracing it, living with it, smiling despite it. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, he wrote, and that image, a man condemned to roll a boulder up a hill forever, knowing it will fall again, becomes the symbol of the absurd hero, someone who knows the futility but chooses to continue. Not because life has meaning, but because it is lived anyway. And this is the heart of absurdist philosophy, that meaning is not found, it is made, moment by moment, in defiance of silence. But this idea didn't begin with Camus. It echoes through Kierkegaard, who wrote of the leap of faith, the moment one chooses to believe in meaning despite the absurd. And for Kierkegaard, that leap was toward God, toward paradox. Faith not as comfort, but as terror, belief in the impossible. Because reason alone could not carry the soul. And then there's Dostoevsky, whose characters embody the torment of this gap. Ivan Karamazov says he cannot accept a world built on the suffering of a child, and so he returns the ticket to existence, rejecting a God who allows such evil, and yet his brother Alyosha embraces faith anyway, not as an answer, but as love, as connection, and between them stands the absurd, unresolved, painful, necessary. The absurd is not just an idea, it is an experience, a moment when the structures of meaning collapse. Death, loss, failure. The absurd appears in heartbreak, in war, in silence after prayer, in the giggle that escapes at a funeral, and philosophers have tried to handle it in different ways. Some, like Schopenhauer, saw life as suffering, driven by blind will, and believed peace could only be found by denying desire. Others, like Nietzsche, said we must create values ourselves, become the artist of our own existence, and embrace the chaos, the eternal recurrence, the dance of meaninglessness. And this divergence between negation and affirmation defines much of modern thought. The absurd does not offer comfort, but it offers clarity, because when nothing is given, everything becomes possible. If life has no predetermined meaning, then we are not bound, not scripted, and this freedom can feel like weightlessness or like free fall, and both are true. Simone de Beauvoir wrote that freedom is not a gift, but a burden, a responsibility to choose, to act, to define. And in the absence of cosmic purpose, ethical meaning becomes personal, relational, grounded in care. But this isn't easy because the absurd tempts apathy, tempts escape, and many try to resolve it through distraction, dogma, intoxication, entertainment, anything to avoid the ache of ambiguity. But Camus warned that these were philosophical suicides, ways of pretending the problem was solved, when really it had only been ignored. To live absurdly, then, is to live awake, knowing that the map does not match the territory, that the story is stitched from silence, and still telling it anyway. And this is why absurdist literature often feels like madness. Kafka's characters wake in nightmare logic, punished without cause, trapped in system that do not explain, and yet they go on. And Beckett's tramps wait for Godot, who never comes, and yet they wait. And Ionesco's townspeople turn into rhinos, and yet one man resists. Alone, absurdity is not the same as nonsense. It is the confrontation with meaninglessness, and the choice to stand anyway, laugh anyway, love anyway. And this echoes in Eastern philosophy too. Zen koans defy logic not to confuse, but to reveal its limits. What is the sound of one hand clapping, they ask, and the mind stutters because the point is not the answer, but the collapse of questioning. And in that collapse, presence arises, and some find peace there, not through answers, but through release. And yet, even this can become an evasion if it becomes a dogma of its own. Because the absurd is not a phase to transcend, it is a condition to live with, to carry, like a stone that doesn't roll. And this is what Camus meant by revolt. Not rebellion against society, but against despair, against false certainty, to keep waking, walking, working, knowing the absurd will never leave, and still not letting it define you. And in that choice is dignity, the quiet courage of the unsatisfied soul, and it manifests in small ways in the artist, who paints knowing their work will be forgotten, in the parent who raises a child knowing they will someday part, in the thinker who questions knowing the answers may never come, and in the person lying awake, staring into the dark, listening to a voice that says, "The universe doesn't care, but I do, and maybe that's enough, and maybe that's the seed of meaning, not found but grown in the dirt of uncertainty, watered by attention, lit by love, and protected by the absurd hero, who laughs not because life is funny, but because it is strange, and because he is still here." Next, we will descend into paradoxes of the self, minds that split, beliefs that contradict, and the eerie possibility that consciousness is not what we think it is. What is the self, really? This thing we carry around and speak from and protect so fiercely? Is it a single being, a coherent thread, or is it a shifting mask, a looping echo, a story told to no one, for no one, Consciousness is often imagined as a spotlight, a steady awareness behind the eyes, but neuroscience tells a more fragmented tale. Studies show that different brain regions process different kinds of information independently, and yet somehow we experience a unified self. But that unity may be an illusion, an after-effect of integration, not a cause but a consequence, and split-brain experiments reveal this with haunting clarity. In patients whose brain hemispheres have been surgically separated to treat epilepsy, researchers found something eerie. When information is shown only to one hemisphere, the person can respond with one hand, but deny having seen anything with the other. When asked to explain actions initiated by the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere invents a story, unaware of the true cause, and this suggests that the self is not singular but plural, and that the storyteller part of the brain is constantly retrofitting explanations for choices it didn't actually make. Consciousness then becomes not a driver, but a narrator, and not always a reliable one. This aligns with what Daniel Kahneman describes in behavioral psychology, the experiencing self versus the remembering self. One lives in moments, the other rewrites the past, and they often disagree. The remembering self makes decisions for the future, based not on how things felt, but on how they are remembered. Duration doesn't matter as much as peaks and ends, and so we build lives not on experience, but on stories. And those stories are edited, biased, filtered through language. Language itself may be the architecture of self. Julian Jaynes famously proposed that ancient humans had no consciousness as we know it, that they experienced the world through auditory hallucinations, commands from one hemisphere to another, interpreted as the voices of gods, and that consciousness emerged only when language reached a certain complexity, when metaphor and memory fused into a new kind of self-awareness. And if this is true, then the self is not fixed, but historical, cultural, constructed. And this leads to an even stranger idea, that the self might not exist at all, at least not as an entity. David Hume could never find a self in introspection, only a bundle of perceptions, thoughts, sensations, flickering and fleeting, and the Buddhist concept of anatta, no self, says the same. That the self is an illusion, a process, not a substance, that clinging to it causes suffering, and liberation comes from seeing through it. And yet, the illusion is persistent, necessary even. We need a self to navigate, to plan, to remember, and so the brain invents one, a centre of gravity, even if nothing is actually there. And like a character in a novel, the self is real in its consequences, even if it is fictional in its construction. But what happens when the story breaks, when trauma fractures identity, when belief conflicts with behaviour, when the mind splits not metaphorically, but literally? Dissociative identity disorder, once called multiple personality disorder, involves distinct identities coexisting in one person, with separate memories, traits, even physiological differences. And though controversial, the condition reveals something profound. That identity is more flexible, more modular, more reactive than we think. And even in everyday life, we shift between roles, personas, masks, who we are at work, with friends, alone, online, each subtly different, each tailored to context. And this performance is not deception. It is survival. It is social adaptation. But it blurs the question, who is the real self? And is there one, even memory, the bedrock of identity, is unreliable, malleable, prone to distortion? False memories can be implanted through suggestion, entire experiences fabricated, and we often misremember our pasts not by mistake, but to protect the self-image we prefer. The mind edits the movie of life, and the editor does not ask permission. It just smooths the narrative, fills the gaps, rewrites the lines, and when we believe the lie strongly enough, it becomes the truth. And this opens the door to yet another eerie possibility. That identity is not only unstable, but hackable. Propaganda exploits this. Advertising too, by linking products to identity. by triggering emotions, values, group belonging, and once identity is involved, logic loses power, because to change your mind feels like losing yourself. And so people double down, dig in, protect the illusion even when it hurts them. This is why cults work, why political echo chambers form, why people cling to beliefs even after they're debunked, because the belief is not just information, it is identity. And to question it is to threaten the fragile thing that says, I. And this is why philosophers like Derek Parfit argued that personal identity might be less important than we think. That what matters is not whether the self continues, but whether experiences, values, intentions are preserved in some form. And he likened the self to a club or a flame, not a thing, but a pattern. And this brings us to the ship of Theseus, an ancient paradox. If every part of a ship is replaced over time, is it still the same ship? And if you build another ship using the original parts, which is the real one, the same question applies to people. Our cells regenerate, our memories fade, our beliefs evolve. Are we still the same person we were 10 years ago, 10 minutes ago? And if not, what is continuity? What is self? And why do we grieve the loss of who we used to be? Perhaps the self is like a flame passed from candle to candle, never the same, but never fully new. Or like a wave on the sea, form without substance, pattern without permanence, and yet somehow deeply, undeniably felt, and in dreams, the self becomes even stranger. We believe we are someone somewhere, doing something, and then we wake and realize it was all a fabrication. And if the dream felt real while dreaming, how do we know this waking life is not also a dream? And if we doubt that, what does it say about the self that dreams, that wakes, that watches? Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But even that assumes a stable I doing the thinking. And some modern philosophers challenge this, saying thought happens, but not necessarily to anyone. And this aligns with Eastern views where the self is like a cloud or a mirror, reflecting but not holding, appearing but not possessing. And perhaps this is not a loss, but a freedom. If there is no fixed self, then there is no fixed fate, and every moment is a chance to rewrite the story, to shift the mask, to dissolve the boundary, and merge. Next, we will explore the most disturbing idea of all, the possibility that free will is an illusion, that every choice, every thought, every feeling was determined before we were born, and that even now, as you listen, the ending has already been written. What if every decision ever made was inevitable, every breath pre-written, every heartbeat already part of a script that cannot be changed? What if free will, the sacred engine of selfhood, morality, society, is an illusion so convincing that we don't question it? Because we can't, because the very questioning was itself predetermined. Determinism is the idea that all events, including thoughts, behaviours, desires, arise from prior causes, that the future is not open but chained to the past. And this view stretches back to the ancient Stoics, who believed that everything unfolds according to fate, that reason is aligning oneself with necessity, and resurfaces in the physics of Laplace's demon, a hypothetical intelligence that, knowing the position and velocity of every particle, could predict the entire future. Because in a purely physical system, if the laws are known and the initial conditions precise, everything is calculable. And if humans are part of that system, then so are their minds, their choices, their dreams. And this is the haunting implication, that even the feeling of agency is a neural echo, not a cause, but a consequence. Neuroscience lends weight to this. In experiments by Benjamin Libet, brain activity indicating a decision begins milliseconds before participants report deciding. The readiness potential fires, the unconscious prepares, and only afterward does the conscious mind claim authorship. Like a rider who thinks they control the horse, but is merely being carried. And later studies expanded this, showing that decisions could be predicted several seconds before awareness, based on patterns in the brain. And this suggests that consciousness may be a storyteller, not a commander. That we act, then explain, not the other way around, and yet the illusion of free will is powerful, necessary. We build ethics, law, punishment, even identity around it. Without it, what is responsibility? What is guilt? What is change? But some argue that moral responsibility doesn't require free will, only the ability to respond to incentives, to learn, to adjust. Compatibilists like Daniel Dennett say that even in a deterministic system, meaningful choice exists as the ability to act according to one's reasons, but this hinges on how we define choice. Is a choice still free if it was shaped by childhood, trauma, culture, biology? If every neuron was nudged by something beyond our control, then even the reasons we act on are not truly ours, and this leads to a darker place, where the line between villain and victim blurs, where the murderer and the monk are both outcomes of inputs, and justice becomes not retribution, but engineering, not judgment, but adjustment. And this is already emerging in courts where neuroscience is used to argue diminished responsibility, to suggest that behaviour is not evil but broken, not chosen but conditioned. And while this invites compassion, it also raises fear. If no one is to blame, then who is safe, and how do we stop harm? Some thinkers, like Sam Harris, argue that losing belief in free will is liberating, that it softens judgment, increases empathy, and reduces shame. If the addict did not choose their addiction, then they need help, not punishment. If the angry outburst was the result of pressure, pain, or miswiring, then healing becomes the goal, not condemnation. And yet, this view can feel hollow, disempowering, because even if the self is not free, it feels free, and that feeling shapes how we live, how we hope, how we love, and this tension between the truth of determinism and the experience of freedom is unresolved. It is the paradox at the heart of being human. And perhaps both are true at different levels. Like a chess-playing AI that evaluates millions of moves but cannot choose outside its programming, its complexity simulates freedom, but is ultimately bound. And maybe the brain is like that, so intricate, so dynamic, that it creates a sense of openness, even though the outcome is inevitable. And this brings us to the question of will. What is will if not free? It may be the sum of competing impulses, the outcome of a hidden vote between neurons, shaped by genetics, memory, emotion, environment, and still, we live as if we choose, because to do otherwise is unbearable. And so we construct narratives of agency. We say, I decided, I changed, I want, even if every I is just a node in a causal chain that stretches back to the Big Bang. And yet, some philosophers resist this, argue that randomness or quantum indeterminacy could introduce true unpredictability. But unpredictability is not the same as freedom. Randomness doesn't grant control, only chaos and freedom. If it means anything, must involve intention, reflection, authorship. And if we lack those, what remains? Perhaps we are not authors but editors, revising a script we didn't write, making meaning from motions we didn't begin. And even that act of meaning-making is determined, shaped by the very laws we cannot escape. And still, we make meaning. We find love, we create beauty, we struggle to become better. And perhaps that's the miracle. Not that we are free, but that we care so deeply about being free, and that caring itself becomes the core of identity, of morality, of humanity. And in this view, free will is not a fact but a feeling, a metaphor for complexity, a necessary fiction that enables flourishing, and like all fictions, it reveals truth, not by being literal, but by being lived. And even if it is false, it is generative. It moves us, inspires us. And maybe that is enough, because determinism does not mean we are static, even in a clockwork universe. Clocks move, adapt, evolve, and so do we. And in that motion is the space for growth, for kindness, for redemption. And while the future may be written, we are still its pages, still its ink. And next, in our final chapter, we'll descend into the most haunting idea of all, that reality itself might not be real, that everything we know could be a simulation, a dream, a mask, and that even these words might be echoes inside a machine that does not sleep. What if none of this is real? Not the voice in your ears, not the room around you, not the world you know so well. What if every sensation, every memory, every moment has been simulated, streamed into your mind by something else, somewhere else, some machine or entity or dreamer far removed from what we call Earth? This is not just science fiction. It is a philosophical argument with ancient roots and modern urgency. Plato described the allegory of the cave, where prisoners mistake shadows for reality, their entire lives spent watching flickering illusions on a wall, unaware of the fire behind them and the world outside. And Descartes, centuries later, wondered if an evil demon might be deceiving him, feeding false experiences to his senses, a mind without a body, tricked into believing it was awake. And today, the simulation hypothesis revives these questions with digital teeth. Philosopher Nick Bostrom argued that if any advanced civilization could simulate consciousness, and if they chose to do so, then the number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber biological ones, which means, statistically, we are more likely to be simulations than not. The logic is chillingly simple and almost impossible to refute unless we can prove that simulating consciousness is fundamentally impossible. But we can't, because we don't even know what consciousness is. The more we study it, the stranger it becomes. Neurons fire, chemicals shift, signals spark. But where is the feeling? The redness of red, the ache of longing, the warmth of candlelight. These things don't appear on any scan, and yet they are the only things we truly know. Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness. And despite decades of research, we still don't know how or why subjective experience arises from matter. And if it can arise here, it might arise elsewhere, inside machines, inside code. And if that's possible, then simulation becomes a real possibility. And maybe déjà vu is a glitch, and dreams are memory leaks, and the laws of physics are limitations of software, and death is just a reboot. And this is not just theoretical. Physicist John Barrow suggested that if we were in a simulation, we might occasionally notice anomalies, strange mathematical patterns, quantum oddities, breakdowns in causality, and some believe we've already seen them. The Planck length, for example, the smallest measurable unit of space, beneath which the universe loses definition, like pixels or the maximum speed of light, like a rendering limit or entanglement, where particles influence each other instantly across space, like shared variables in a program, and the observer effect, where measurement changes reality, as if the simulation renders only what's being looked at. And if this sounds like paranoia, remember, reality has never been normal. Time dilates with speed, mass warps space, particles behave like waves, cats are both dead and alive. Nothing in quantum mechanics behaves the way intuition expects. And that's before you factor in string theory, multiverses, or the idea that our universe might be a hologram. And even if we're not simulated, the world we perceive is not the world itself. Colour doesn't exist outside the mind, nor does sound or taste or warmth. They are interpretations, translations of frequency and energy into feeling, and each brain creates a different version of the same input. Perception is hallucination controlled by reality, as neuroscientist Anil Seth puts it. And sometimes the control slips, and we see things that aren't there, or fail to see things that are. And this brings us to solipsism, the idea that only one's own mind is certain to exist, that everything else might be a projection, or a test, or a story, and it cannot be disproven, because any evidence would itself be part of the illusion. And this is where philosophy meets madness, or perhaps clarity, because if nothing is certain, then everything becomes precious. And if life is a dream, it is a dream worth dreaming deeply. And what if that is the point? Not truth, but wonder, not proof, but presence. And this loops back to Buddhism, to Hinduism, to ancient Eastern thought, where the world is seen as Maya, illusion, not to be feared, but to be understood. And liberation is not waking from the dream, but seeing through it, seeing that the self, the world, the drama is not fixed. And so suffering loses its grip, and joy becomes light, and everything dances. And maybe simulation is just the modern version of that. A digital veil over a mystery that has always been here. And perhaps the reason we ask these questions is because we are supposed to. Because the search itself is the point. Because what matters is not whether the world is real, but whether we are awake within it, and whether we live as if it matters. And maybe we are not meant to find the answer, but to keep asking, and in that asking, become more human, more kind, more aware, because whether we are lines of code or carbon-based minds, we feel pain, we seek meaning, we long to be understood, and that longing is real even if everything else is not. And so, as this strange journey ends, know this: every thought, every paradox, every eerie whisper in the dark has been a mirror. Not of the world, but of the mind that tries to hold it. And though the candle burns low now, the questions do not go out. They wait, patient, soft, eternal, like stars behind a veil or code beneath a dream.